Chapter 1: The Missing Guests. Elliot Raines woke up at 5:30 in the morning, just like every day. He was used to the routine: a jog around the park, a quick shower, and off to work at the Harmony, a large but cozy hotel in the heart of New York City. As a middle manager, he performed thousands of tasks every day, from checking reservations to resolving conflicts with guests. There were rarely days when something threw him off balance. But this time it was different. The Harmony Hotel was exemplary: stylish interior, convenient location, and impeccable reputation. But lately, cracks have begun to appear on the surface. Over the past 6 months, several guests staying in room 305 have disappeared without a trace. The police investigated, but found nothing: no signs of a struggle, no signs of a break-in. Each time, the hotel took the fall, paying compensation to the relatives of the missing and trying to avoid publicity. However, Elliot couldn't just ignore it. He watched all the surveillance footage, but didn't notice anything suspicious. The guests simply entered the room and never left. No shadows in the corridors, no strangers. It seemed as if room 305 was swallowing them up. This morning, Elliot was standing at the reception desk when Sarah, one of the maids, approached him. Her face was pale. "Elliot, you have to see this," she said, almost in a whisper. They went up to the 3rd floor together. Sarah opened the door to room 305. The room looked immaculate: the bed was neatly made, the bathroom was clean, and there were no signs that anyone had been there. But on the table by the window was an item that didn't belong to the hotel: a black leather wallet. Elliot picked it up, and inside were documents in the name of Joseph Collins, a guest who had disappeared last week. It was impossible: the police had checked every corner of the room and seized all his belongings. "Did you touch it?" Elliot asked Sarah. "No, I called you right away." He carefully put his wallet in a plastic bag and decided to watch the CCTV again. But this time, instead of the standard recording, the monitors began to flicker. For a few seconds, an image appeared: a man in a black suit standing in the corridor in front of room 305, looking directly into the camera. Then the screen went black. Elliot spent the whole day looking for an explanation. He called all the employees who worked that night, but no one had seen the men in the video. The police, when he tried to inform them of the new circumstances, only advised him not to intervene. "We've already closed the case," the officer said over the phone. In the evening, Elliot decided to go into the room again. He had a strange feeling that the key to the mystery was somewhere nearby. When he switched on the light, he noticed something new: a small folded piece of paper left on the bedside table. Unfolding it, he read only 3 words: "You're next. Run." Elliot's heart was pounding when he suddenly heard a sound, a soft whisper that seemed to be coming from the walls. He looked around, but the room was empty. And yet, the feeling that he was being watched did not leave him. His instincts told him that he was at the center of something much bigger than a simple disappearance. Elliot did not sleep that night. Only one thought pulsed through his mind: room 305 was hiding a secret that someone really didn't want him to know. Chapter 2: The Unseen. Elliot sat at his desk in the back office of Harmony Hotel, the lights dimmed. The plastic evidence bag containing Joseph Collins' wallet lay on the desk in front of him. He stared at it, his mind racing with questions. Who placed it there? How had it appeared after the room had been combed over by the police? And why had the cameras shown that unsettling men in black? The note from the room, "You're next. Run," lay unfolded beside it. Elliot tried to tell himself it was a prank, maybe some twisted joke played by one of the staff. But the pit in his stomach told him otherwise. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah, the housekeeper who had alerted him earlier. "Elliot, something's wrong on the third floor. Come now." He grabbed the wallet and the note, shoving them into a drawer before hurrying to the elevator. The third floor was quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you, heavy and unnatural. As soon as the elevator doors opened, he saw Sarah standing near room 305, her face pale. "It's the guests next door," she whispered. "They called reception. Said they heard someone screaming inside this room." Elliot froze. Room 305 had been empty since Colin's disappearance. No one had checked in. "Did you hear it?" he asked. Sarah nodded. Only for a second, but it was enough. Elliot hesitated. He didn't want to open that door, but as the manager, he had little choice. He fumbled for the master key and unlocked it. The door creaked open, revealing the same immaculate space he'd seen earlier. The bed was untouched, the furniture undisturbed. He stepped inside, his flashlight illuminating the room. "Hello," he called, his voice barely above a whisper. No response. But then he noticed something new, the faintest imprint of footsteps in the carpet leading toward the bathroom. Slowly, he moved closer, pushing the bathroom door open with trembling fingers. It was empty, the gleaming white tiles spotless. Behind him, Sarah gasped. He turned to see her pointing at the mirror above the sink. A single word was scrawled in condensation, as if written by an unseen hand. "Leave." The air grew colder. Elliot's breath fogged in front of him. He grabbed Sarah by the arm and pulled her out of the room, slamming the door shut behind them. The moment they stepped back into the hallway, the strange chill dissipated. "Call the police," Sarah whispered. Elliot shook his head. "They won't believe us. And even if they did, they've already closed the case." She looked at him, wide-eyed. "What do we do?" Elliot's mind was racing. "We'll keep this quiet for now," he said. "But I'm going to figure out what's happening in that room." That night, Elliot took the guest records home with him. He spread them across his kitchen table, poring over every detail about the people who'd stayed in room 305 over the past few years. Patterns began to emerge. Nearly all the missing guests had been traveling alone. Many of them had checked in late at night. Most chilling of all, each of them had booked the room online through the hotel's website, often at a suspiciously discounted rate. His eyes narrowed as he spotted the name of a guest who'd vanished months ago, Rachel Hill. Her case had been one of the first. Elliot's fingers hovered over her phone number, listed in the reservation file. He dialed it, not expecting an answer. But to his surprise, the call connected. "Hello," a voice said on the other end, soft and trembling. "Rachel?" Elliot asked. "This is Elliot Raines, manager of the Harmony Hotel. You stayed with us a while back." The line went silent for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely audible. "Don't call me again. Don't try to find me." "Wait," Elliot said quickly. "I'm trying to help. Please, tell me what happened." Another pause. Then she whispered, "They're watching." The line went dead. Elliot sat there, staring at his phone. A creeping dread settled over him. Whatever was happening in room 305 wasn't just coincidence. And now, he realized, it was following him. At midnight, as Elliot was about to call it a night, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message from an unknown number. It was a photo, grainy and dark, but unmistakable. It showed him sitting at his desk earlier that day, staring at Joseph Colin's wallet. A single message accompanied the image. "Stop digging, or you'll be next." Chapter 3, The Disappearing Thread. the photo rattled Elliot. The lighting and angle suggested it was taken from inside his office, yet he was alone the entire day. He double-checked the locks on his apartment door and the windows before sitting down to think. His instincts screamed at him to stop, to let it go. But the warning messages only fueled his determination. He couldn't abandon this now. Not when lives were at stake. Elliot returned to the hotel early the next morning, before most of the staff arrived. His first stop was the security office. He replayed the footage from the previous night. As expected, it showed nothing unusual, no one entering his office, no movement in the hallways. But when he paused the footage from 3:15 a.m., the time when he'd received the photo, his stomach dropped. The camera feed from the office was a blank screen. For exactly 3 minutes, the footage had been replaced by static. When it resumed, the office was untouched, but Elliot felt the unmistakable presence of being watched. By mid-morning, the hotel was buzzing with its usual activity. Guests checked in and out, the cleaning crew prepared rooms, and the maintenance team tinkered with repairs. But room 305 remained ominously empty. Elliot deliberately kept it out of the booking system, marking it for routine maintenance. He needed more time to figure out its secrets. Just before lunch, Sarah appeared again, visibly shaken. "Elliot, I've found something else," she said, hesitating. "What now?" he asked, his voice tense. "In the laundry room," she whispered. "One of the sheets from 305. It has stains." "Stains?" Elliot frowned. "What kind?" Sarah handed him the sheet, carefully folded. When he unfolded it, his breath caught. The white fabric was marked with dark red blotches. Blood. And not fresh, it had seeped deep into the fibers, suggesting it had been there for a while. Yet, when Elliot had inspected the room the day before, the bed linens had been pristine. "Where did this come from?" he asked sharply. "It was mixed in with yesterday's laundry," Sarah said. "I don't understand. We strip the beds every day. There shouldn't be anything like this." Elliot's mind raced. He took the sheet to the maintenance room, where he found Jacob, the senior technician. "I need you to analyze this," Elliot said, placing the sheet on the counter. Jacob raised an eyebrow. "Analyze it? For what?" "Blood," Elliot replied flatly. "I need to know if it's human, and how long it's been there." Jacob's expression shifted. "This about 305, he asked quietly. When Elliot nodded, Jacob sighed. "I'll take a look. But you should be careful, Elliot. People have been talking." Later that day, Elliot sat in the hotel's small coffee shop, sifting through more records. He'd expanded his search, looking not just at room 305 but at any unusual patterns in the hotel's history. It didn't take long for him to find something chilling. Every few years, a guest disappearance occurred, almost like clockwork. Most were tied to room 305, but others were more subtle. A guest would check in but leave without officially checking out, their belongings left behind. In each case, the trail went cold. His digging revealed another unsettling detail: the hotel's original owner, a man named Charles Grayson, had mysteriously vanished in 1982. The property was sold at auction shortly afterward, and the records from that period were scarce. As Elliot read through the sparse documentation, one file caught his attention: a police report mentioning Grayson's rumored connection to organized crime. It speculated that the hotel had been used as a front for illicit activities, including money laundering and trafficking. But the investigation had been closed with no charges filed. Elliot leaned back in his chair, the pieces falling into place. Was room 305 tied to these old crimes? Was someone, or something, ensuring that the room's secrets stayed buried? That evening, Jacob found him in the hallway. The technician looked pale, his usual confident demeanor gone. "You're not gonna like this," Jacob said, handing Elliot a folder. "It's human. And based on the analysis, that blood, it's decades old." Elliot felt a cold shiver run down his spine. How is that possible? The sheets were clean yesterday. Jacob shook his head. "I don't know. But there's something else. I checked the vents in 305, just in case. Found this." He handed over a small object wrapped in plastic. Elliot unwrapped it, revealing a tarnished silver locket. Inside was a photo of a young woman, her face hauntingly familiar. Elliot's breath caught. He'd seen her before. In one of the missing guest files. That night, unable to shake the feeling that he was being drawn into something far darker than he'd imagined, Elliot decided to take a risk. He locked the door to room 305, took a chair from the hallway, and sat in front of the room, determined to keep watch. If anything happened, he'd see it with his own eyes. Hours passed. The hotel grew quiet as the last guests retired for the night. Elliot fought the urge to doze off, his eyes fixed on the door. Then, just past 3 a.m., he heard it, a faint noise, like a whisper, coming from inside the room. He stood, his heart pounding. The whisper grew louder, almost rhythmic, like chanting. And then the doorknob turned, slowly, from the inside. Chapter 4, Echoes of the Past. Elliot froze as the doorknob of room 305 turned ever so slightly. The rhythmic chanting from inside grew louder, its cadence hypnotic and deeply unsettling. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet remained rooted to the spot. Suddenly, the sound stopped. The hallway plunged into silence, save for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Elliot held his breath, his hand trembling as it reached for the doorknob. When he touched it, the metal was icy cold, sending a jolt up his arm. Bracing himself, he slowly turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was empty. The bed was perfectly made, the curtains drawn tightly shut. But something had changed. In the center of the room stood a single object that hadn't been there before, an old, leather-bound journal. Elliot stepped inside cautiously, his flashlight casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. He picked up the journal and flipped it open. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with spidery handwriting. The entries were dated decades ago, the earliest from 1979. As he skimmed the pages, a grim picture began to emerge. The journal belonged to Charles Grayson, the hotel's original owner. The entries chronicled his growing paranoia about room 305. He wrote about hearing voices, seeing shadows move where no one stood, and feeling an oppressive presence in the room. Grayson's final entries became increasingly unhinged. April 12, 1982, the room knows me. It knows my sins. The walls whisper my secrets. April 18, 1982, I've tried to close it off, but it won't let me. It wants more. April 25, 1982, tonight, I'll end it. I have to. The room must be sealed forever. The final entry was an unintelligible scrawl, the pen pressing so hard it tore through the paper in places. Elliot flipped to the back of the journal and found a crude diagram of the hotel's floor plan. Room 305 was circled, with a single word written next to it, Gateway. Suddenly, the air in the room grew colder. The curtains rustled, though no breeze could have entered. Elliot's flashlight flickered, and a low, guttural whisper filled the space. He bolted for the door, slamming it shut behind him. The next morning, Elliot sat in his office, the journal open on his desk. He'd barely slept, haunted by the voices and the diagram. The word gateway echoed in his mind. What had Grayson meant? Was the room some kind of portal? To what? A knock at the door startled him. Sarah stepped in, her face pale. "Elliot, there's something you need to see," she said. She led him to the hotel basement, a place Elliot rarely visited. The air was damp and smelled of mildew. Sarah guided him to a section of the wall where the plaster had begun to crumble, exposing old bricks underneath. She pointed to a faint marking etched into the stone, a symbol that matched one drawn in Grayson's journal. "I found this while cleaning," she said. "It looks ancient." Elliot traced the symbol with his fingers, a shiver running down his spine. It resembled an eye, surrounded by jagged lines. He'd seen it before, buried in the journal alongside Grayson's most paranoid ramblings. Beneath the symbol, faint letters were scratched into the brick, "They watch." "Who do you think they are?" Sarah whispered. Elliot shook his head. "I don't know." But Grayson was terrified of them. He thought they were connected to the room. "Do you think it's real?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Elliot didn't answer. Instead, he took a photo of the symbol and decided to dig deeper into Grayson's past. That evening, Elliot reached out to a local historian, Dr. Leonard Price, who specialized in the occult. Price was skeptical at first but grew intrigued when Elliot mentioned the journal and the symbol. They arranged to meet at the historian's office the following day. "If what you're saying is true," Price said over the phone, "this symbol could be significant. It's been linked to folklore about thresholds, places where the boundaries between worlds are thin." Elliot hung up, feeling a mix of dread and determination. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was getting closer to something dangerous. That night, as he reviewed the journal again, he noticed something he'd missed before, a pressed flower tucked between the pages. It was brittle and blackened, as if scorched. Next to it, written in Grayson's shaky hand, were the words, "The key is the fire." At 3:05 a.m., Elliot woke to the sound of his phone buzzing. A text message from an unknown number lit up the screen. It was another photo. This time, it showed the symbol from the basement wall, glowing faintly in the dark. Beneath the image was a single line of text. "You can't stop it. Leave." Elliot's apartment grew cold. He felt the weight of invisible eyes on him. And for the first time since this ordeal began, he wondered if he'd already gone too far. Chapter 5, Through the Gateway. Elliot sat in his car outside Dr. Leonard Price's office the next morning, his nerves frayed from another sleepless night. The historian's building was a small, unassuming structure, its brick facade weathered with age. Elliot carried Grayson's journal under his arm as he entered, a sinking feeling in his gut that he was in over his head. Price greeted him warmly, his lined face lighting up with curiosity as Elliot placed the journal and photo of the symbol on his desk. "Fascinating," Price murmured, adjusting his glasses. He flipped through the journal carefully, his expression growing darker with each page. "This symbol, it's ancient. Tied to rituals involving liminal spaces, places where the boundary between our world and others is weakened." Elliot felt a chill. "Others? What do you mean?" Price hesitated. "Entities. Some call them spirits, others, demons. According to folklore, such places act as gateways. They demand sacrifice to remain dormant. If the balance is disturbed." "Disturbed how?" Elliot asked. "Usually through a violent act. Death can anchor these energies," Price said grimly. "You said this hotel had disappearances?" Elliot nodded. "At least a dozen over the years. Mostly tied to room 305. Price leaned back, steepling his fingers. If Grayson's notes are accurate, that room could be the epicenter. A portal, if you will. Have there been any recent signs? Elliot hesitated, then recounted the chanting, the static on the security footage, and the blood-stained sheet. When he mentioned the locket, Price's expression hardened. Objects tied to victims often act as conduits. You said the locket belonged to a missing guest. I think so, Elliot said. What should I do? Price handed the journal back. The key lies in the fire. Grayson believed the gateway could be closed by burning something tethered to its power. It's risky, but it might work. That evening, Elliot returned to the hotel, the journal and locket tucked securely in his bag. He avoided Sarah and the other staff, not wanting to explain what he planned to do. As the sun set, he stood in front of room 305, the air around it feeling heavier than ever. He entered the room, his flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. The chanting began almost immediately, low and guttural, as if the walls themselves were alive. Elliot placed the locket on the bed, then pulled out a lighter and a bottle of accelerant. If this works, he whispered to himself, it ends here. He doused the locket and the bed in accelerant, his hands trembling. As he flicked the lighter, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the flame. The chanting grew louder, the walls vibrating with the sound. You won't stop me. Elliot shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. He flicked the lighter again, shielding it with his hand. This time, the flame caught, and the locket burst into flames. The effect was immediate. The chanting turned into a deafening roar, and the room shook violently. The air grew stiflingly hot, the walls blistering as if consumed by an invisible fire. Shadows writhed across the ceiling, their forms grotesque and inhuman. Elliot stumbled back, shielding his face from the heat. The fire spread unnaturally fast, consuming the bed and locket in seconds. As the flames reached their peak, a piercing scream erupted, and the room fell silent. The temperature dropped abruptly, and the shadows vanished. Elliot stood in the charred remains of room 305, his ears ringing. The oppressive feeling was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. He staggered into the hallway, where Sarah and several staff members were gathered, their faces pale with fear. What happened? Sarah asked. Elliot shook his head, too exhausted to explain. It's over, he muttered. The next day, Elliot filed his resignation. He couldn't stay at the hotel, not after what he'd experienced. As he packed his belongings, he found the journal sitting on his desk, though he was certain he'd left it in room 305. A final entry had appeared in Grayson's handwriting. The fire closes the door, but the gateway is never truly sealed. Elliot stared at the words, his blood running cold. He closed the journal and left it on the desk, walking away without looking back. As he drove out of the city, the hotel loomed in his rearview mirror, its shadow stretching unnaturally long across the road. He didn't notice the faint whisper that emanated from the locket now resting on the passenger seat.